Welcome. I'm Jennifer Lee Levitz, and this is Unleash the Power of Age. We're a program for the Gloucester Council on Aging and Rose Baker Senior Center. I have an exciting guest for you today. He's a dear buddy and wonderful benefactor of the Rose Baker Senior Center, that Council on Aging, and many other things in town. And you'll hear all about that. And it is Fred Cowan. I'm so excited.
Oh, thank you for asking me.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Good.
We were chatting away for a good 20 minutes before I said to myself, I think we should start recording because this is exactly where I want to go.
Fine.
A lot of people know you around town.
Yes.
And for particular organizations or things, and of course, whatever extensive social network you must have.
I think of myself primarily as a professional community volunteer, and that's how most people in town know me. Dick and I live actually really quite insular lives out here in Gloucester. It's served its purpose for that for the over 40 years that we've been here.
40 years.
Moved out in '79.
I can't believe that I haven't known you before now. It's very interesting to me.
Well, a lot of work I was doing was quiet and behind the scenes. A lot of it initially had to do with dealing with HIV. And I was the director of a number of organizations in the city where anonymity was important.
Right.
Prior to basic civil rights laws that were passed in the Commonwealth. So a lot of people only knew me by my first name as well, including people on the city council and whatnot.
Okay.
So it took a while for me to develop an individual personality in the city.
That's interesting to me, the HIV part.
Mm.
Years ago in New York, there was an organization I was part of called Hospital Audiences. Mm. And one of the programs that we worked on was HIV education in schools. Mm-hmm. And I worked on that. And it was eye-opening to say the least for me. Of course, it was in the Bronx, not in Gloucester, but
I found in Gloucester, it's extraordinary what a volunteer can, or in some cases is allowed to do, particularly in the school system, where because I was not being compensated, the fact that I have no degrees in anything really, but was more than just familiar with basic prevention policies and whatnot, that in the high school, for example, I was allowed to teach or be brought around to speak on subjects. I spoke before the city council and all kinds of places that they would have expected somebody to have been a doctor or a nurse or something, but because you're a volunteer, you're allowed to do these things. So my key to success is being a volunteer. And I've been a volunteer since I was, almost 50 years.
Wow. Mm. Okay, 50 years. Mm-hmm. Take me back.
Okay, how far?
As far back as you want to go.
Well, I was born in Boston, brought up in Worcester. My dad was general counsel for the world's largest manufacturer of abrasives. They lured him from Boston to come to live in Worcester to be the general counsel. And Norton Company in the city of Worcester was very good for my family. I started to tell you earlier, I had real trouble in school. For somebody born in 1948, they weren't really clear on learning disabilities or whatnot. Mm-hmm. More often than not, I was branded as being lazy. Mm-hmm. or some other. So to leave Worcester was a good thing for me. I was always welcomed back there and for holidays and whatnot, but I left school when I was 19. Whereas my brothers, older and younger brothers, both of them went on to graduate school and conventional careers, one in medicine and one as an Episcopal priest. But in my life, my real route to success came from a summer job in Hyannis where I'd worked at a motel and was good at it. And so when I left school, my dad suggested that I should look for a job in a hotel. And Ritz-Carlton hired me on the desk in 1968. And by the time I left there 10 years later, I'd had a lot of different jobs within the hotel, but all of them very centric on you, the hotel guest, one at a time, or in the kitchen, looking at meals and adding, carved radishes or put parsley on stuff or whatnot.
Right.
They called me a food checker. And then I got involved in the financial end of the hotel, which again, numbers and focusing and whatnot, was really good at. And so I was the youngest hotel credit manager in the city of Boston.
Wow.
By age 24.
Wow.
And I stayed there until I was 29, when I left because at that point, Dick Gardner, my partner, was physician. There got to be a stage in our lives when there was room enough for one really very demanding profession, and he wanted to be a doc more than anything in the world. So it was an ideal segue for me to leave the hotel industry, but not the concept of service industry. So I ran our private lives while he got to be a doc. We lived in town because he was on call all the time. Previously, I'd lived in a small rented house in Ipswich for a couple of years, which was a very good thing for me to get kind of my act together. I partnered with Dick when I was 24, and after 5 years together, it was really a good idea for me to not to going off to an office, but rather to be planning the rest of our lives. And so that's what I did. When they invented the beeper, and it became possible. When we used to go out, he used to go from telephone to telephone to telephone to telephone, and he was on call all the time.
No, I know.
Yeah. So we thought we might buy a house. We were renting an absolutely wonderful apartment in Boston, but it was a rental, and with a roof garden on it. It was really neat.
Ooh.
Up on Beacon Hill.
Ooh.
So we found a house out in the western part, beyond Cambridge, in Littleton. And before we had signed the papers, a friend called to say, "I know you've found a house, and congratulations, but there's a house I want you to see in Gloucester, and you've got to come out and have a look at it." And he said, "You really must come today." This was in April, and so we had followed that good advice from that man before. So we drove out here and bought a house.
Wow.
And we've been here ever since.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. Because where we live we got under the wire financially, economically. And it's beautifully sited. It's small. It's on 1/3 of an acre, surrounded by water, looking at Wingersheek Beach.
Oh.
So as a place like Avalon, to come and relax and recover was wonderful for us. And then with the emergence of HIV, I'd been doing volunteer work, development work for a school in the western part of the state, and I, for a while, ran a kind of a consulting business where I acted as a computer and ran the business end for self-employed people as an extension of my work at the Ritz-Carlton, that I was trustworthy and accurate and discreet. And so I had a couple of designers in New York and a plumber and several wealthy friends who hated doing book work and could afford to hire me. So I proved to myself that I could make a living without being tied in an office setting. Then HIV began to emerge, and our friends began to die in really alarming numbers. Dick is 10 years older than I, and so his friends, and we shared many friendships. People began to die, and I had marketable skills for AIDS Action Committee. And so I went there around 1982, something like that, into their accounting office, and took over their credit rating, saw to it that their bills were paid and that people gave us discounts because I guaranteed them money in 10 days. And I, for one way or another, volunteered weekly at AIDS Action Committee for 30 years. I was on the hotline, and that really is where I took off. My ability to connect to people over the phone on the most sensitive of issues. Many people around the country, this was a national hotline by that time, who had no place to turn. It was anonymous, but my voice was recognizable, and I was there for sure every Wednesday, plus 6-7 hours stretch, and then many other days during the week when there would be shortages and whatnot. So I moved from the accounting office. Once they could hire somebody to do what I was doing, that gave me a free sense that I could go and work on the hotline, where I taught people that usually had somebody listening.
Right.
In order to become proficient at developing their own style
Right.
of doing that work.
Right.
Then word got round that $50,000 that the state was allocating for HIV prevention was being recruited by an organization in Gloucester. And they said, you live there, find out what this money is going to be used for. And that's when I met Ron Moran at NUVA, which was at that time Gloucester's really only place for drug rehab, drug and alcohol rehab, and also violence issues.
Yep.
And Ron was very farsighted, and he could see that the issue of HIV was going to be affecting people who were sharing needles. And NUVA used that $50,000 to establish the city's first methadone treatment program. And so that's where that money went, and AIDS Action went, yay. And I became really sort of the unofficial liaison between AIDS Action Committee and Gloucester to see to it that Gloucester didn't duplicate services. And from my board time with NUVA and on the executive committee there for a good long time, until they merged with Northeast Health Systems. And I continued on there working with Health and Education Services, where I was the director there for about 20 years. Mostly focusing on ADA issues, accessibility and whatnot, and learning about behavioral health too, and how it could be integrated, HIV prevention, what could be integrated into their standard issues of psychotherapy and whatnot. They were enormously successful that way. But HIV was not part of their repertoire. So I did it.
I have to stop us. I could listen to you talk about this very thing for another hour, and I need to find out some more stuff.
Sure, go ahead.
Let's see. All right, so that's when you came to Gloucester.
Yep,
That's
79.
what you started doing in Gloucester.
Yeah.
And we know you mostly I know you from the library.
Yes.
And from here at 1623.
Yep.
But mostly from Rose Baker.
Yes. And
do you want to talk about getting involved with any of those?
Sure. Somewhere in the late 90s, when Bruce Toby was mayor, I get the dates confused, but he very thoughtfully asked me to join Gloucester's Board of Health. And at that point, Gloucester was focused principally on wastewater management issues and the issues of sewers and whatnot. And I came interested in infectious disease and transmission and whatnot, so I filled a slot that way. And at the same time, they asked me to be the liaison with the senior center that was at that point, was it Middle Street? Yeah, Middle Street.
Okay.
It was the Y building there.
Right.
So technically, I've been a member of the Council on Aging for over 30 years, but not really very active other than Board of Health issues and sitting in on meetings occasionally and whatnot. When I joined the library, when I retired from AIDS Action Committee, I figured that pretty much anybody with good training could do what I was doing at that point at AIDS Action, and so it was a good time for me to withdraw and do something else. And that's when I was recruited to go on the board at the library, which to me was marvelous because it was looking forward. and creative, whereas AIDS Action Committee has been trying to prevent the future. There's a very different mindset. And it was a great springboard for me to get really back into my city. And I was a trustee at the library for 9 years. That's the maximum length of time. They don't have term limits. So, but on there, I was treasurer twice, and briefly, I was president of the board for a while, or the chairman of the board. I was also with NUVA. With Needy Meds. I was been director there for, I was about 10 years or so. Rich Sagal joined the Board of Health and asked me to be on that board.
Right.
Let's see. I get them confused.
You're a busy guy.
Yes,
busy.
I was very, feeling very useful. Gloucester's an excellent place to be a volunteer.
I agree.
Yeah. Once I left the library, it seemed a natural move to come to the senior center. COVID hit, and that changed a lot. There was a change in directors. I worked with the mayor and HR director and others to put together a job description for a director of elder services for the city, cabinet level job. And we advertised with it, and some remarkable people applied. But it's a pure example of teamwork, where I could have hired half a dozen of these people that came through, but the HR director, Donna Lee, at that point was really clear who he thought would be good for the city. And he was right, because when Elise's performance came through, it just wasn't, kind of there. That's who we want.
It was done so beautifully, because the former director, Lucy Sheehan, was beloved.
Wonderful woman.
Beloved, and the idea of having someone follow her was like, how could you possibly follow her?
Mm-hmm.
And the choice was excellent. The excellent
Yes,
choice
yes.
worked, and
I get to work with her.
and you get to work with her,
Yeah.
and I get to work with her.
Yes, it's really wonderful.
And she surprises me all the time.
Yes.
There's so much there.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, you see this funny, happy,
Yes.
socially oriented gal, and then you sit down and talk. Or then you read what she writes just on the newsletter.
Oh, yeah.
Or then you find out what else she has in mind, or this or that.
Oh, yeah.
And
She's for real. She's for real.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so great that she's also local, and she has a history,
Mm-hmm.
and she knows the place, and that makes it. I think whoever added that element was wise, because
Yeah.
hard to make your way in
Yes.
Gloucester.
But when people get rowdy, she can go downstairs and stare at people. And this problem is solved,
And the problem is solved.
Yeah.
And she didn't have to go through that. Who the hell is this coming in here and telling
exactly.
us what to
Exactly,
do?
not at all. Not
She's
at all.
one of
Yeah.
of the people.
Another place I got to work, and I don't mean to act as if I somehow forgot it, that's the North Shore Health Project, which was initially the North Shore AIDS Health Project. I'm not a founder, but I was there very early, again, as a liaison to keep them from feeling they had to do everything from scratch. AIDS Action was great at sharing their newsletter and hotline and all kinds of stuff, so that the people in the community who wanted to create this facility did so with the full support of AIDS Action Committee behind them, and that included me. So I was privileged to work there. People would come from all over the state to get treatments at the health project, including physicians who saw their patients getting well and would come out just to see for themselves. So that introducing alternative therapies to the community at large was huge community service that AIDS Action benefited from. The Fenway Community Health Center heard about acupuncture and massage therapy for people who were in trouble with HIV,
And even Reiki. I'm a
Reiki.
I'm
Yeah.
a Reiki
Well, yes.
person myself.
Yeah,
Also.
well, you had the feeling kind of run it up a flagpole and see if anybody salutes.
Sure, why not?
Because they reached the end of their tether with Western medicine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's in my past. Now, being a senior to me is a revelation. I have said this to other people that may have heard me say this, but I feel a duty to seniors to apologize for discounting what an older person can do. That I used to not bother to ask somebody older than I to pick up the other side of the table to carry it across the room because I presumed that they couldn't. And that just was hugely unfair. And I'm discovering this myself. During COVID, Dick and I were pretty housebound. He was doing medicine by telephone and the computer, and I was going to Zoom meetings, and so I got really almost no exercise for a year and a half. And reemerged after I got my first vaccine shot, but really was astounded at how my physical self had deteriorated. I couldn't carry things and stuff.
I had to learn how to carry myself. This is what happened to me.
Well, someday you'll visit. My house is nothing but stairs. The stairs, because we're way up above the water from the way below Washington Street. So I found I couldn't carry grocery bags more than one at a time and stuff like practical stuff. So I pulled myself together and went up to Fitness Zone, and Kurt Gross was there, where I'd been a member 25 years before. And he put together a training program, a rehab program for me to work with a trainer who is younger than I, but he's not a young man. So he itself is in terrific shape, and he keeps me from hurting myself, but he also is convinced that I not only can recover, but I can also gain more capability, more stamina, more whatnot. And I've done this now for a year, and I'm just stunned what exercise and believing that I can do is done for my head and just for my independence. So, to be able to carry your own luggage means that you can travel.
Right.
So the Senior Center is growing a lot of different programmatically, but in particular to be more serious about encouraging people into physical training.
Exactly. We have.
And our food program, they're working with the Open Door and their dietitian, healthy foods, but in volume enough to run the engine, and to encourage people to eat regularly and whatnot. So a lot of nutrition stuff.
Well, I would like to pick up what you were saying. There are two things I want to relate back to my sponsors. Gloucester Council on Aging, Rose Baker. There are at least 5 or 6 exercise or physical activity programs that people can be involved with. One of them is on Zoom. The rest of them are in-house, and they're free. So actually, there are also 2 or 3 things that we run on 1623 on the channel that has, you see the one, there are 3 channels. There's the regular channel that has the programming, that would be 6. There is 9 is whatever else there is. 9 is the says education programming. And that's where we have something at 1 o'clock every day. This show runs every day at 10. And one of the programs, some of the programming that's included is exercise. So there's that. The other thing I wanted to pick up on that relates to Council on Aging and Rose Baker is your raison d'etre, your volunteering. Rose Baker is fueled by volunteers.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So for people who want to be involved, there are a lot of volunteering opportunities at Rose Baker.
Yes. But now there's a training program. Lisa's brought in an organized training program so that people, for example, who work on the desk, that the messaging is identical. And people also who wish to volunteer feel that that they're supported. That everybody develops a style on how they work interacting with people. But there's a continuity of commitment and a sense of purpose. Now that Elise, she's a great deal of training in social work, and
Exactly.
so to be an organized mind as she has, she translates that into training for volunteers, so that people who never volunteered before can feel empowered to come and do this, and that they'll like Hippocrates, do no harm, and that they'll be appreciated too.
Appreciated, and they'll learn something.
Yes,
and they'll have
meet marvelous people. That's another thing. The senior center is a leveling. People come from all different corners at the senior center for different reasons, but often they find that their reason was enough to empower them to come. But once they get there, somebody like Junie recognizes, that person has an artistic bent, and if I can just convince that person to visit the art room, that it will open up a whole new window. People who worked with their hands repairing fishnets are now doing collages and whatnot. It's marvelous, really cool.
It is.
Cool.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm glad you appreciate us.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to look at the time and clock. We filled our allotted time without even blinking.
My pleasure.
I'm so appreciative that you came and sat down with me. And there's so much more to hear and learn, to plumb your depths. But I also want to say how much we appreciate having you at Rose Baker. Your presence.
I am compensated, just not in money. My volunteer work is a high-paid job. It's just not in money. I feel really useful at Senior Center. That's important to me.
Oh, I think that's important to all of us, feeling useful. And
That's 76. Click.
That's it. I'll just stop it.
That's the easiest thing in the world. You got the 50-cent tour.
Wow, that was so interesting. I kept wanting to stop and go, blah, blah, blah.